us. Those are their, I guess, best guess scenarios. Okay.
Mhm. Hello, Nick.
Good evening. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Yeah,
Hi.
doing fine. How are you, Nick?
Good.
Hey, everyone.
Good to see
Hello,
you.
Seth. Yeah.
Likewise.
We're waiting on Peggy and let's
I
see.
know Peggy's away, so I'm not sure if she's also going to be joining us, but I know she's
Oh,
away this week.
Okay.
But you
And
do
you
have
know,
quorum,
is Kate
started.
Stein going to be joining us?
I'm not quite sure about Katie, but you do have a quorum, so you can get started.
Okay. So let me call the order. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I pledge allegiance to the flag
To the
of
flag
the United
of the
States
United States of America,
and
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Did people get a chance to review the minutes of last month's meeting?
Yes.
Rachel, thank you very much for your great job, and it's tremendous having you be able to translate everything that happens in the course of an hour and a half into 2 pages.
She does a pretty awesome job.
Could I have a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you. Are there any adjustments or modifications to the minutes?
No.
No.
Nope.
All right, so I guess all in favor of, I guess I need a second
Yeah,
to
second.
second. Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you. Okay, so those minutes are approved and can be put in the system. Hello, Katie.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi, Katie.
So
Sorry, I
hello.
got locked out of my email. I apologize for being late.
no problem. So I would like to, so Peter is not going to be able to be joining us today. So he sent, Rachel and Peter sent the report that they forwarded to everybody. So I thought we'd go through that quickly, and then I've also modified or entered that data into the same format that we had last week or last month rather. So now we moved from 3 or 4 buildings that were at the town campus to, basically another 4 or 5 buildings that they've added. So slow process, but nonetheless, it's pretty good. Let's see if I can find the presentation. Let me see. I'm going to show my screen. I'm not sure how to do that. Any more? Rachel, do you know how to show my screen? How do I do that?
There's a share screen at the bottom.
Yeah.
It says share screen in the middle.
Oh, I see. Sure. Got it.
Click on that, and I find if you select share my screen rather than share an app, it works better.
How's that?
That's
Good.
good. We can see it.
So basically, they did the same profile of information on this month that they did for last month. The police department totals roughly $200,000 a year, and you can see the breakdown. The largest is the custodial costs, and maintenance and electric are the next two largest costs, and the grand total is down here at the bottom. So, and then they did the same thing for the senior center, which runs just under $100,000 a year. Again, the custodial costs are the largest, maintenance second, and then electricity and the utilities come in basically even with the maintenance numbers for the senior center. The next is the highway garage. Now, this is the garage out on
On Fort Path.
Fort Path, right. So it's roughly $30,000, $30,000 to $40,000 a year. Seems like this year they've had a larger expenditure on maintenance. I'm not sure what that was for, but they must have done something major in the larger in the building than they've done historically. Again, pretty normal spending profile. And then finally is the ambulance garage, which basically is just the maintenance costs. And I'm assuming that the maintenance cost is all that the town is responsible for. So I'm guessing the electric, gas, water, those type of things are, and the cleaning are done by them or paid for by the ambulance center. Is that, I don't know, Rachel, do you know that?
Yes, that's correct. They take care of their own utilities.
Okay. And they clean their own space as well?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Cool. So are there any questions on the kind of summary? I'm sure you've had this all in advance, and I was going to go share with you how I kind of restructured the data.
I do have one question. I was curious. The custodial costs seem to be the same.
Yeah, they're the same every year, which is
Do they-
on all the buildings.
Is it a fixed contract? It
Oh.
seems unusual.
That's a very good question. Yeah, it does seem unusual.
Yeah, and yeah, you see it's 45,750.
Yeah, same with the senior center.
And,
You would think it wouldn't fluctuate very much, but you certainly wouldn't think it would be to the dollar every year, right?
Yeah, I think Peter explained last meeting that, at least the buildings that are shared on the campus, on the town campus, property, they have like shared custodial services that they, apportion to the different buildings according to their need. And so, but you would still think it would go over. I think the third
Exactly.
one, the 2003, 2004, may be a little bit low because it's probably missing 1 month. Because this was last
right,
month.
exactly.
Yeah, so maybe missing a month and a half of data.
It's the
But it'll
same.
come in still around, and it does beg the question, like, are the custodial costs keeping up with like custodial salary increases and cost of living increases?
Or the other way, has the scope of work been pulled back to maintain a static number?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's another possibility.
Or is it some kind of a fixed price contract which would seem unusual, grant you.
Yeah, usually there's an escalation clause on an annual contract like this.
These are town employees, though, correct?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, the other way of looking at this maybe is, even though the cost for town employees presumably goes up, year over year, at least cost of living bumps, it may be that the same amount of hours or an approximate number of hours are being apportioned each year. So it's not really going up much.
Seth,
You
are
know,
they
this-
part of the Teamsters Union?
They are.
They are.
Yeah, for the school district, they're Teamsters. The custodians are Teamsters.
I think the same is true for the town staff.
Yeah, it's a question for Peter, certainly.
Okay, I wrote those questions down. I'll forward them. If I go through, how would I change the screen?
That's why I share my screen, because then you can operate your computer, just jump to the next screen and it'll follow. So if you go out to like maybe unshare and then share again, oh, there you go. Okay.
Are you seeing the spreadsheet now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Whoop,
sorry.
Yeah.
So what I did was I took the same, I just added to the spreadsheet. So last month we had the Arts Barn, the town campus gym. And I've added the police department, senior center, highway garage, and ambulance garage to each. And I incorporated the square footage of each building on there as well. So you can see in 21, 22 how the cost per square foot's ranged. And I understand that really you kind of have to look at the town campus and the town gym as one. You probably ought to combine them. It's going to be easier to combine them and look at them that way because it's confusing keeping them separate. Because there's so much shared utilities in the electric side. Police department's around 13 is up there. It's probably the highest cost of all the buildings that they have. But of course, the police department is used 24/7. So to me, that doesn't seem unreasonable, even though it would be higher.
Hey, David, do you mind zooming in just a
Sure.
tick or two? Thank you.
How's that?
Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you.
So I just broke it out by each year, and then I did it for the building. So for example, if you look at I'll blow this up. So you could do it this way. So this gives you each building, and it kind of just breaks it down, cost per square foot of each component. How much is going into custodial? So you can see in the police department, it's $610 a square foot. Maintenance is $283, and utilities is $451. I can also sort the same data so that we could take the police department over 3 years and look at it one next to the other, which probably makes some degree of sense. But so if you go down, then I looked at it again by the 2023, we did the same numbers. And again, the numbers are so close to 2020, 23, 24. But then what I did was I said, all right, I went to the DRA report and I added up what's the priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, which takes you out basically 5 or 6 years. And then, I'm sorry, the priority 1, priority 2 takes you out those first 5 years. And then the rest, I kind of said, all right, let's go beyond that. Let's only look in basically a 5-year horizon and add. So these are the costs per square foot for each of those buildings. And then if you add the operating costs plus the capital costs for the next 5 years to get a total, you get a sense of where things may be. Which is interesting because the ambulance garage just jumped off the chart here at $80 a square foot. And the DRA report has a whole host of modifications to the building for the equipment and to add extra space and has about $400,000 of additions to the building, which was, so it's really not, it's more of a modernization and expansion of this than it is for a repair and maintenance. As you can see, it's $400,000. It was in the DRA report. And I can actually pull that up. And if you look at the DRA report, you can see that. And then I did the same idea. And again, this is more of a modeling exercise so that we can kind of come up with how to do this. And I said, all right, and I just assigned an arbitrary utilization. All right, just for illustrative purposes. We'll have to come up with it. I said the Arts Barn is utilized probably 30% of the hours it's open, of the hours it's available. The gym is around 45%, the town campus, because it's an office building, and 75%. Police department, I put it at 100% because of its 24/7. Senior center, 60, highway garage, 75%, because it's basically a 7-day operation almost. And the ambulance garage is a 24/7 operation.
Right.
So
Can
if you-
I, but can I ask where, so you said that these numbers are, you're just like kind of arbitrarily assigning
Yeah,
utility
I'm
numbers?
just assigning
utilization
utilization.
numbers?
I'd like to be able to come up with a report that actually helps us, or we'll have to do some research in order to come up with the actual utilization rates. But what we're trying to do is come up with a model that we could take, put all facilities on one page type of deal, so that you can triage out those things that seem to make most sense to be evaluating as to a potential change, or evaluating as a that they're great, and where do you put the dollars? Because, in any respects, there's always low dollars. So, if you look at, these buildings that are high utilization and low cost, you'd probably say you'd want to put more dollars in here than you would if something fell in this category, in this quadrant. And I don't have anything that falls in that quadrant at the moment, but this would be high cost, low utilization. So.
Okay, but until we get more study on this, then this is
Correct.
basically just a guesstimate.
This is a guess, but it's a way of, it's a methodology of analyzing the spaces, if you will.
Mhm.
And that kind of makes sense to everybody, then that's something we may want to move forward with. But like, I suspect when we get the data for like a Memorial Town Hall or Academy, they're going to be out in this area. Academy, all the time, it's going to be down here, high cost, low occupancy, no occupancy.
Yeah.
And Memorial Town Hall may fall into that area as well.
What
And
would,
an interesting question of how you deal with those buildings. But
what
that's
do you,
kind
what
of
do you,
focus.
should I go?
Yeah.
What would be your criteria? Would it be hours of operation times the number of days times employees? What is,
Well,
how are you
I'd go through-
determining?
Yeah, I would ask for there's a scheduling system for the town where they assign rooms and they assign activity. Obviously, employees have their own offices and would be there for regular periods of time. But, for all the kind of common spaces and things of that nature, you'd be able to assign the utilization off of how many hours are available versus how many hours there's actual people in there. And that's different than a position, so that's a room utilization versus a position utilization, because that's a little bit more granular of an activity to look at. Than I'm sure we're not quite there yet, but
Right.
Because there may be a very large room with 1 or 2 people in it. You'd be better off scheduling that in different way, or scheduling that activity in a different room.
And we'd also have to account somehow in this estimation for the times that a building may be utilized. Like some buildings are utilized more on weekends than during the week.
Or
So you
seasonal.
may think it's empty during the
Yeah.
week, but it's highly used on weekends or in the
Right.
summer or something like that. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of you're mixing apples and oranges in a lot of ways, but when you boil it down to a strict utilization versus cost, because that doesn't take into account the type of use. But you got to start somewhere. So
Yes,
Mhm.
this is the first cut, and
Yeah.
you're absolutely right, Seth. So that all of a sudden it says, all right, let's take a stronger look at the buildings that are, over here. That are, these buildings over here, high utilization and relatively lower cost. And let's go and look at them and see out why, or it doesn't make any difference what quadrant, but this is
Yeah.
just a way to triage out and have the outliers kind of jump out at you, so that we can have a better way of assessing it, I suspect.
yeah.
Is my thought. But you're absolutely right. I mean, because if you look at, school buildings are fundamentally closed for 3 months of the year.
Yeah.
So, and so all of a sudden, do you put that in the utilization rate or do you exclude those periods?
Well, it could be that we could come up with a formula, an Excel formula.
Right.
That could put some of these factors in and we can come up with a utilization rate.
So I think promising, at least, and wanted to get everybody else's opinion on whether you think it's a promising approach in terms of how we can, because I think there's only 20, 30 some odd buildings, so we're well down the road of, the first group of them. And with a little bit of effort, I think we could probably, at least we certainly can get all the cost side set away. And then try to get utilization, whether it's, we may want to just do the basic utilization by interviewing people from each major department and saying what's going on, but there is a central scheduling system that I know of that should tell you something about the utilization.
I think it's really good what you did, because what it lends itself to is determination of efficiency, which will have effect on the numbers.
Right.
And what'll give us more concrete factors to deal with instead of
And
I
then,
like
Yes.
the methodology of just starting high and continuing to,
yeah,
narrow
and
down
a
and
lot of
hone in.
data and kind of triaging it down into the
Yeah.
buckets so that you can actually do something with it.
Yeah.
And this is really mostly an exception analysis. How do you identify things that are outliers? What are the big, versus the things that are normal? Basically, you're going to have a bell curve when this all is said and done. When you look at this, so you want to look at the things on the left side of the bell curve and the right side of the bell curve as the things that you want to say, all right, how do you want to strengthen or change the profile for those?
Well, ultimately, it would probably end up modifying operations and behavior. If you look at it all the way to the maximum end, again, an issue of efficiency. It's a good exercise.
Well, and the point is that you would really need to look at it from a standpoint of what size endowment would you need in order to support this program.
Well, and that begs another question. Are we a program focused committee or are we a maintenance and facilities physical plant focused committee? And I take from our charge that we're more concerned directly with facilities maintenance and planning rather than program planning. So that's where the utilization part is a little bit questionable for us, because yes, it's good to help us to get a framework, because each year there's a limited font of money to maintain buildings. So it can help us to guide a prioritization of, what needs to be maintained, when it needs to be maintained, and what impact that will have on the town and the town's use patterns. But like for us to make a recommendation, like, well, we think, the senior center needs to be utilized up to 75% of its utilization capacity or something like that, doesn't really seem like it's within our mission.
I guess I read it a little bit differently. I agree with that as a major part of our mission, but it's also, are you looking at, First Selectwoman Lyons has talked to me about what's going to happen to this committee is probably going to be a committee that's going to make a recommendation on Ryerson, for example, or Jeffrey. So how would that ultimately be? Should it be kept? Should it be disposed of? Should it be dealt with? And, if you look at, and my view is that it's very hard to make a decision on those two buildings, even though they are urgent in terms of evaluation once the town receives them. But the real question is, how do those facilities compare with some other facility? Are there other things that may actually have a greater sense of urgency? And so I see this as a kind of a way of triaging down the system to actually say, all right, how did these things compare? And if we're going to take, what are the top 5 facilities that we really want to talk about as an organization and make some recommendations on? I mean, and I think that's because I think it would be a mistake if we just made recommendations on a facility because it's potentially closed. You see, so that's in my experience, that's the mistake that the town has made on the academy issue, as being a past chair of that committee. And they kept it as its own little entity rather than keeping it in a broader context of everything else and thinking about it, how does it fit? So I think that's my concern, at least, and how I read our charge is to take this a little bit broader so that we don't get buttonholed into a political argument over what to do with one facility in particular.
Right.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
So going back to, tracking utilization, you mentioned that you would look at the reservation system for reserving rooms and things. I don't think all of the buildings in town use that. For example, I think like the schools may be in a different category or have their own thing. I think the Arts Barn is utilized by a nonprofit, but it's kind of their space to use. So how would we track those kind of out of the box
I think we just got to talk to the various owners of the
stakeholders?
and find out. And it may be just it may be something as simple as their impressions of how it's being used. Or I find it in my experience, somebody always has something written down in some notebook somewhere or on some
Oh yeah.
and it probably is not consistent across all facilities, but if we just listen to what people have to say, I think we're going to learn a lot.
That sounds logical to me.
Okay. So if this makes sense, I say we move forward. I'll contact with Peter and we'll get a schedule for how do we get the rest of the buildings on in at least get the operating and capital costs identified.
Yeah, and I think if I remember correctly, I think Peggy had indicated that it might actually be easier or at least split up some of the work to not rely completely on Peter for that and the maintenance and crew, and facilities crew, but also to rely on information that can be drawn from our fiscal office. Like they have a lot of information that Peter and Billy always had access to.
Yeah, I'm assuming that a lot of this came out of the financial system.
Yeah.
So if they can get this done, then we should be able to model and generate it. And
yeah.
So basically, I just assume, frankly, I just love them to, if they could take that data and, I mean, I just made it into this giant database list where I just put the numbers in by building, the component, the cost, the square footage, and then I put it into a block, whether it's maintenance, utilities, custodian.
Yeah,
Really,
and I think the Munis financial software can spit out reports for each building. If like Stacy just builds what budget line items for each building we need, like the gas, electric, custodial, and whatever else, that it's probably a much quicker process than we're thinking.
So, and then, once we get it into a database like this, then we can sort it, mix and match it any way we want, ultimately. And it's much more simple that way. Okay, well, I will move forward with Peter on that and we try to take this to a next step and sit down and see what the data looks like. Okay. Is there any other comments on the, this is the old business part, the facility reports. Okay, within that, I'm gonna move on then to new business. I forwarded to everybody on the committee about several weeks ago, Aaron Mannix had sent me a copy of the plan of conservation development. And I put it together. Let me see. Nope. I've had it. Oh, here it is. So I've gone through it. I've read the whole thing. I hope everybody else has taken a look at it. I put a couple comments in my email to everybody about it. Basically, I had kind of 3 or 4 kind of big takeaways when I read it, and I'll throw those out there and then we can open it up for discussion. The first, I was surprised that the population in town has been dropping over the last several years. When I read this, so that was number one. Number two, it struck me that there's a very limited amount of space that could be used to build any kind of housing. And that's a real challenge. And it kind of struck me that it's interesting that if the population is dropping, but there's housing deficiencies, why is that? The third question was the demographics of the town, where all of a sudden that you're seeing the town being more barbelled, where the older, there as a percentage of the total population, the people 55 and older represent a much higher percentage of the town than the people in the 20 to 35 range. And that group is dropping at a fairly alarming rate, which is interesting to me. So I put those kinds of things together and said, all right, is from our committee's perspective, should we actually suggest to P&Z that's putting this together any kind of release of town property that could be used to address and incentivize the people that are in that 20 to 35 or 20 to 40 age group to buy houses and move to town. Because it strikes me that those are the folks that teach in our schools, that work in our police department, that volunteer for the fire department, that coach the kids. I mean, those are the people that are really adding an awful lot to the profile of the town. And so it seems to me the question is, should we have a statement in there that says that, is there a way, because the town owns well over 600 acres of land across the town of Madison, which is none of it's residential. Is there a way to evaluate and consider that some of the town property could be released to target housing for folks that are in that demographic that we're coming short on? So that's my hypothesis. I'm going to throw it out there for conversation.
Well, one thing it also, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the other things that it mentioned was a plan for not only a variety of housing stock and affordable categories of housing stock, which we also have state law that's going to require us to move more in that direction. And if we don't come up with a vision for doing that ourselves, then a developer can come in and basically name where they want to place an affordable complex. So that combined with the fact that there's also incentive from the state and findings in the plan of the draft plan of conservation and development, that we ought to try to develop more transit oriented housing would also ideally fit with bringing in younger folks, like recapturing what used to be called the yuppies, folks who just graduate from college or graduate school and they're just making their way out and they need affordable housing in transit oriented areas. And that would make our town more attractive to them. And that as they earn more money, presumably, and start to have families, they move into our more traditional housing stock.
So you're thinking like a space like, for example, it always, my years on EDC and some other things I was involved with, a perfect example is the old railroad station at the end of Bradley Road, and right where getting that from Amtrak to be able to use that because they consider that overflow parking for
for the gigantic parking lot at the train station
with nobody in it.
Yeah.
It also has, we put in the pillars, so if we ever wanted to put in a parking deck, we could.
Exactly. So, and then another area that I thought of along those lines, and I don't believe the town owns it now, but it's been sitting fallow for so long, we might be able to get it for relatively cheap. And that's that little gateway triangular property at the corner of 79 and Old Route 79 across from the ambulance garage.
Right.
Because that's walking distance to the train station.
The old police station that we sold.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that and also the Hald property, which is, I don't know, I think there's developers have plans for it, but I don't know what's happening. And that's on New Road, on either side of the road, right at the Hammonasset connector, that corner.
Yep. Yeah.
Probably 6 or 8 acres there of space. That is just, I mean, talk about juxtaposition of what you're saying in terms of a good location and access to highway, relatively close to town.
Yep.
Similar to the condos that are further down New Road that also have what are called quote affordable housing, even though they're very nice and that's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I tend to agree that I don't think that this is strong. It doesn't strike to me that this report is strong enough on that issue.
Well, the one thing, I sort of took a very high altitude view on the report and I actually read it twice. And the big thing I came from, and maybe some of this perspective comes because I'm a newcomer. I've only been here for 4 years. But it would be interesting to really do a study to see not only from a domestic or a housing aspect, but also from a commercial aspect. Because commercial will also bring people into a community as much as having available housing. And I can't help but think that there are or will be properties that may come available that could be retrofitted for possible commercial use that would bring people in. But the one big thing that struck me is Madison doesn't, or I'm missing it, doesn't promote itself. You sort of know Madison is here, but does Madison have any type of, other than the Chamber of Commerce, any type of public relations, any way to get the people outside of Madison to know what Madison is like and where it's at and what it has to offer? I mean, it just all seems to come together. You can have the spaces, but you got to let the people know you're here and what you have available or could have available. Maybe creating partners with businesses. And
I have to go back and look and whether or not the Bradley Road Visions study is still part of the plan of conservation development. Because that really addresses what you're talking about, Charmaine, in that that study suggested that really to develop around Tux's Pond, and both on the north and south end, to develop on Bradley Road, and actually said to really target where Rings End Lumber is, that area, it used to be Tux's Lumber, to have that as potential housing and potential other things next to the train station, close to town, close to everything. So that was a big issue, as well as trying to do something where the fire station is and how that, because that's a main connection point to Bradley to the Tuxas Pond, but also to all the other properties and then part of that Bradley Road vision statement was to have some sort of a centralized wastewater management system for
That was the kicker. Yeah.
which was, and then basically the study we did at the time when we did that, because I was an author of that study with the EDC back in the 90s. That was to actually have the system played on the ball field at the corner of Scotland Road and yeah, Scotland, at the corner of Scotland, right before it goes up to the Scotland Road and Scotland Ave. I guess that's it. I think that's the it's not the JCP. I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
Jason.
that's Jason.
Yeah, correct.
It was basically you'd put something underground there, and you'd have a wastewater management system like you have at the high school, and you'd still have the playing field there, and it would still work, and nobody be worse for wear. But that's a major limitation on the downtown area is the wastewater management, because the septic systems are, I mean, I think the average age is probably 80 or 90 years old of those systems in the downtown area right now.
And there was an issue with, I think the soil is sandy and the water table level is high. So it was like the combination of things that, ultimately I got the sense that town planners kind of took a flyer on that development because, it felt like it was too challenging and too monumental a task to get that wastewater stuff built. Is that not the case, or was it just shelved?
I think so. I mean, I think it's partially that, but also partially the general tendency to not want to have greater development.
Yeah.
Any kind of large development in large business development in the downtown area. But as a result, we're turning our back on probably the neatest asset for the downtown area, which is Tuxas Pond. So I think you're right. I mean, I think both Seth's comments and Charmaine's comments make a lot of sense, that there needs to be stronger statements, at least on here, of business development and housing options for especially people that are in that younger demographic area. Any other comments?
David, there were other things in reading that plan. And this is peripheral, really. But things like the Coastal Resiliency Commission at some point may need some kind of property to use for what they have to do as time goes by, and they have to accommodate changes based on climate and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking about changes. The report talks about changes to infrastructure and something that the town will have to look at down the road. So, I mean, we can't know what that is now, but that's another thing that's going to get factored in somewhere. Properties that the town is actually going to need for public use. And again, it's peripheral because we don't know what they are, but food for thought.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Well, why don't I draft up a note to Erin Mannix from the committee. I'll send it out to everybody based on this conversation. And if you all approve, I'll forward it to her. I'll send you an email and you can forward it out that way. So,
Thank
I mean,
you.
basically, what I'm hearing is that we need to, is there, based on the study and the information, is there a way to improve the level of transient housing and close to transportation area that are addressing the needs of the younger demographic of our town? And can that be accomplished by either acquisition of space, conversion of space, or release of space? I think that's probably the way to, and then how do we incentivize commercial development that would end up also addressing the needs of that demographic?
I would also add to it, like I said before, also a way to promote Madison. To be honest, because I watch TV, the news, and I read magazines, and I never see anything about Madison and any of it. We just sort of are here. My husband and I found it accidentally.
Yeah.
We didn't even know about it. We just sort of stuck a dart in the map because we wanted to be near New Haven, and we ended up staying here for a couple of years because we fell in love with it the first time we saw it. But I'm not sure the outside world knows as much about Madison as maybe you might want to consider the world to know. We define the world, but how far out we would want to advocate Madison.
Charmaine, are you talking about, I just want to understand this better. Are you talking about advertising for purposes of drawing people to our businesses and our commercial areas? Or are you talking about advertising to try and get people to move here?
You can do both. I mean, the best example I've ever seen, which we certainly would have to squeeze it down. But if you've ever seen advertisements for Pure Michigan, when Michigan started to really start to promote themselves, one of the best I've ever seen. And it just very briefly introduced an audience to an area that many people didn't know very much about, but they put a lot of thinking and thought into it. I'm not saying do anything that, significant, but I think we have to get ourselves outside of Madison and see how we can reach other people to know that Madison is here, instead of just stumbling into it, or it's what you pass to go to Guilford or go to Clinton, or I think it's important. You have to know what you're promoting. So I'm not putting the horse before the cart. But as we look at these ideas and what we want to see or achieve, or what we want to attract into this community, I think one way of doing it is to try to put on maybe look at a PR plan that we can put together to go outside the boundaries of Madison and bring people's attention to this town, because this town is definitely amazing. And I think you would get good response, but we'd have to have a plan around it and something to offer and to show. But it's just
So I do remember vaguely, because I can't give you all the details, but I believe this happened when the Tri-Board Facilities group was meeting way back before the referendum. And there was a video created. And again, I could be misremembering what it was created for, but there was a beautiful video created. And I believe it landed with the local real estate agents, because at the time we wanted people coming into town to know about the strength of our schools and things like that. So I can certainly reach out and see if that's still where, if I'm remembering correctly, and if that's still where it lands. But it wasn't long enough ago that it would be obsolete, but it is kind of what you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, I would just say, Charmaine, I think your ideas are absolutely right on. The issue is that the plan of conservation and development is a document that's kind of hurting in a direction. It's not gonna, and it doesn't tell you how to execute.
Yeah.
It just kind of sets boundaries. It kind of basically tells you where the end zones are and where the sidelines are. And then you got to figure out the plays, and you got to figure out what's going on the field. And so a lot of what you're doing is about execution. So I think it's important from our perspective to get in this document the points we're making that would encourage that execution. Not to, so it's that point about expanding the housing and those demographics and in some way of dealing with the utilization of space on our town, and whether it's land that the town owns that's not being well utilized, whether it's land that we should be arguing to reacquire or transfer back from, like Amtrak, that area on Bradley Road, or whether it's an area that we can convert to something else. I think those are, but it doesn't strike me that they're strong enough with this document on those issues.
Understood.
Anything else on that issue? Nick, you've been very quiet. I'm gonna, you have a particularly useful insight after going through all the building committees and the things with the school and listening to all the perspectives. I'm just kind of curious how you read this conversation.
About advertising the town more?
Well, just in general, the conversation of the plan of conservation development and what we should be telling them or what we should be sharing with them.
I gotta be honest, I guess I don't quite see the connection to this group unless I'm missing something.
Well, I mean, this is setting about where you should have zones, where you should have spaces in the town, what should be developed, what shouldn't be developed, those kind of things. And if we release space, then it kind of hits right into this plan. It's going to, so for example, if you say part of Rockland should be released to be developed, right? Or if somebody said, if you ever wanted to convert the town campus and convert that to some sort of a housing function and move government somewhere else in the town, and I'm just throwing it out there as an example, not that I'm advocating or anything, but all of a sudden that goes squarely against the whole plan of conservation and development, and whether it's incorporates into it or does not.
Or what, if we want to sell the Ryerson property, for example, that's
what happens with Ryerson. Ryerson's a good example, or Jeffrey.
There's definitely a housing shortage. There's no question about that. Just look at the real estate websites and you see the properties here they're not on there very long.
And there's no inventory.
No, there's no inventory.
It's growing.
Not at all. So when you mentioned the reducing population, the housing kind of that question or conundrum, I can't get my head quite around that. Just that doesn't seem logical, but is what the data bears out. So
yeah, I'm kind of would ask, I really would like to know more about how they determine that the population is dropping and how the demographics have changed so much or are changing, because it seems a little bit counterintuitive with all the people that have moved into the town. And
completely agree.
After COVID and the number of people that moved in and number of houses that are sold and that kind of stuff. But
I wonder if there's a demographic to be learned that discusses like how many empty nesters are holding on to houses that their children grew up in, because that would explain a dwindling of population. If you have, school-aged families where the kids age out of school and the family maintains the house for years and years.
It's a great point. I would think that's got to be the answer, right? Because there's not houses disappearing. There are a few being built, but not a lot. So yeah, that seems logical.
Seth, I think that is true. I say that as one of the empty nesters who is actually doing that, what you say.
Yeah.
I think just from people I know, anecdotally, right? People I know that is happening.
Yeah. And another question is, and I don't know if this is really within our aegis as a committee. But you know, I've always maintained there's a lot of seniors in town who express concern about taxes and are, you know, saying you're driving me out of my house that I've lived in forever. But at the same time, you know, without trying to sound insensitive in any way, shape, or form, because I'm headed right there too, pretty soon, sooner than you might think. You know, maybe it makes sense to do what a lot of towns across the Northeast United States are doing, which is to establish some relationship with like a major developer that builds 55 plus homes and, you know, builds them in clusters. You don't need as much land. Everybody gets a quarter acre, and you put a bunch of houses there, a swimming pool, and some amenities, and you know, you get a bunch of taxpayers who don't have children utilizing the school district. So it relieves some tension on spending.
I mean, that is a classic example, Seth, that you just hit the nail on the head, because it's kind of like if you go back to the Island Ave discussion, you know, it was the short term, let's take the short term money of the sale of the property rather than looking at the long term potential of what it could do to the tax base by building, by using that space in a different way and how that would contribute. I mean, and over, you know, if you just do the present value over the next 20 or 30 years, I doubt that the numbers would be anywhere close to what they pay, what they received for the sale of that property.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to bring the discussion to a close and ask if there's any public comment. I don't think we have any public.
We do not.
Okay. Well, with that, I guess, so just the next steps then for this meeting, I'm taking away is that I will draft a note to, Aaron Mannix about our general comments on the plan of conservation development, send it to everybody for approval before it goes out to her. Number one. Number two, I will also reach out with Rachel's help with Peter to kind of figure out how we can start expediting the accumulation of the data that we're talking about, as well as starting to grasp ideas of how to cast the utilization rates on spaces or utility of spaces. Okay, so that we can start rating buildings and then we can start moving on with our work in a more robust fashion. Okay. With that, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So
So moved.
Yeah, second,
Second.
Second.
all in favor? Aye. All right.